as long as I can to start off with. So, hi again. I really do appreciate you letting me be up here. You know, when you dive so much into studying in text, it's nice to be able to share. Because sometimes I feel, and I'm learning all this really cool stuff, who can I tell? So you guys get to be that people. So last week, you were here. We left Paul in prison in Caesarea, awaiting transport in Rome. That's the story where we're leaving off. Jumping into Acts 27. Thank you. No joke. Okay. So, you gotta admit, Paul's pretty gutsy here, right? He has the chance to go to Jerusalem and face trial there. But he's like, no, I'm not going to get a fair trial. Send me to Caesar. That's really gutsy. So, fine. Paul actually did always want to go to Rome, so he gets to go to Rome. Free trip, thanks to Rome. Free trip in chains. And so they leave. So, as I like, I always have a map. So he's down over on the side here, to the right side of Caesarea. Takes ship, goes side in, goes up around Cyprus, because the waves are getting a bit rocky. So they go around Cyprus for a bit of protection, land in Myra, where they catch it was an Alexandrian ship heading to Rome. Remember, this is the Roman people. They have a bunch of prisoners that they need to get to Rome, so they're using ships to get the prisoners there. Paul's not the only prisoner, but he is one. So, lands here, and they head on the way to Crete. And that is where we're going to pick up our story, in Crete. So, we actually know that about what time they're traveling, because Luke, writer of Acts, gives us a hint. So, Luke says, we sailed, so Luke and Paul, Luke is with Paul, by the way, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite of Salmone. After we had moved along the coast with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea on Crete. By now, much time had passed, and the voyage had already become dangerous because it was after the fast. What? Do you ever stop in the Bible like, what? The fast. Okay, so what is the fast? Now, there are many feasts for the Jewish people, many feasts and festivals in the Jewish liturgical calendar, and fasting was also a very big part of their lives. But there was one big fast, Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And that day always occurs late September, early October. And so what's Paul saying? After Yom Kippur, the waves get rough. It's a bad time to be on the sea. Now, we did stop in Crete. This is just proof that I was there. We did a little shopping. This is the very famous leather street, which I was determined to get a new wallet in Crete, which I did. So I had a great, lovely shopping day in Crete. I took this photo from our balcony of our cruise ship. And I don't know if you noticed, right there, there's actually a shipwreck in port. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in Crete. Paul wants to stay in Crete. He doesn't want to go out in the waves because the storm. He's worried about a shipwreck, and now I'm sitting here looking at a shipwreck and just off the coast of Crete. It just was one of those kind of full circle moments. That little ship is actually a schooner built in 1902, but it was sunk in 2021. And there's some really odd things. Somebody did pass away on that ship. And there's a lot of weird things happening there, and they're looking and investigating it, but it just stays there. It's just sitting in port. Now, we know that Paul wanted to stay on the island of Crete and wait out the storm, and he says, or Luke tells us, Paul advised the men, I can see that our voyage will be filled with disaster and great loss, not only to ship and cargo, but to our lives as well. But, contrary to Paul's advice, the centurion was persuaded by the pilot and the owner of the ship. Now, you see, when the ship doesn't go on schedule, they lose money, right? We're told later in a passage that there were 276 passengers aboard this ship, and every extra day The money is lost, and we got a few people, and so the owner and the ship's pilot, they opt to continue on. And since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided to sail on, hoping that somehow they could reach Phoenix to winter there. Phoenix was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. And when a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought they had their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along, hugging the coast of Crete. But it was not long before a cyclone called the Northeaster swept down across the island. Unable to head into the wind, the ship was caught up. So we gave way and let ourselves be driven along. They have lost control, right? They've lost control of the ship. They no longer have a say in what's happening in their lives. They are at the mercy of God. And Luke says, we were tossed so violently that the next day the men began to jettison the cargo. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. On the third day. Now, this passage, this little on the third day, I know it jumps out to us in a few places. I'm sure there's one spot that's coming to you right now, Jesus rising. But that third day, it's all over the Bible. It's really kind of fun to watch, and maybe in January, that's where we'll go. But anyways, also, does this story remind you of anything? Where do we read about a shipwreck in the Old Testament? Jonah. Yeah. There are so many parallels between Jonah's story and Paul's story, and we could spend hours. Don't worry, I won't do that to you right now, but we will take a quick look, because I can't help myself. But before we do, there's one thing I want you to kind of pay attention to. There's something to watch when you read Jonah. It's an image of going down and coming up. Down and up and down, like the waves. If you read Jonah, which I think is masterfully written, it's actually it's just brilliantly crafted, so much so that I get that it's divine. Sometimes you just read stuff and you think, whoa. And that is one of the things I love, this up and down in the text. You just see it like waves. So, we'll start. The word of Yahweh came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, get up. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because wickedness has come up before me. Jonah, however, he got up to flee to Tarshish, away from the presence of Yahweh. God calls on Jonah to go to Nineveh, but Jonah does not want to go. He wants nothing to do with the wild and violent Assyrians in Nineveh. So he runs in the opposite direction, as far away as he can possibly go, right? So this is where he starts, over here. He's supposed to go to Nineveh. He decides to go way over here to Tarshish. This is kind of the end of the known world. He's going as far as he can possibly run. And he wants to go to Tarshish. He heads to Tarshish. Do you notice where Tarshish is? Tarshish is the old word for Spain. Do you remember last week when we talked about Paul, where he really, really wanted to go? Spain. There's so many parallels in this story. Anyways, so he went down to Joppa and found a ship bound for Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went aboard to sail for Tarshish, away from the presence of Yahweh. Then Yahweh hurled a great wind upon the sea. Such a violent storm arose, up it comes, that the ship was in danger of breaking apart. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea, just like on Paul's ship was happening, to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel, where he lay down and fell asleep. The captain approached him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call upon your God. Perhaps this God will consider us so that we may not perish." "Come," said the sailors to one another, "let's cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity that is upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. "Tell us now," they demanded, "who is this guy? Who are you that we should blame for this calamity that is upon us? What is your occupation? Where have you come from? What is your country? Who are your people? So he says, I am a Hebrew, replied Jonah. I worship Yahweh, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were even more afraid and said, what have you done? The men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of Yahweh because, well, straight up he told them. That's helpful. And so, we know how the story goes, right? Jonah tells his shipmates to throw him overboard, and they reluctantly, but eventually they do, and immediately the sea is calmed. Jonah goes down into the depths, but God rescues him by having a great fish swallow Jonah. He's down there for 3 nights, and on the third day, the fish rises up from the sea and spits Jonah out onto dry land. This is the theme which you find all over the Bible. From the depths, you can rise up on the third day. The greatest part of the Christian story, when Jesus rose up from death, he did it on the third day. And Jesus knew the significance of Jonah's story, and he proclaimed it. Matthew 12, we read, then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to Jesus, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. And Jesus replied, a wicked and adulterous generation demands a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Jesus also had a story of rising and falling, right? He gets arrested and sentenced to execution. That would be a pretty low point in anyone's life. Then he is risen up onto the cross like a mock coronation. He's executed. His body is brought down from the cross. He's buried into the depths of the earth, only to defeat death and rise up on the third day, right? It's a pretty simple message. Sometimes you gotta fall down before you can rise up. Jesus is the greatest example of that. And so, let's go back to Paul's story, right? Acts 27. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither the sun nor star appeared for many days and the great storm continued to batter us, we all abandoned hope of being saved. After the men had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up among them and said, Men, you should have followed my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have averted this disaster. I just love that Paul is, he's just like, it's your fault. You know, you didn't listen. The winds were howling around them, right? And Paul's, you know, he's a little perturbed about it. He's a little grumpy. It's an I told you so moment. But now, he says, since we're kind of in this mess anyways, he says, I urge you to keep up your courage, because you will not experience any loss of life, only the loss of the ship. Now, how can we say this? Like, everything's raging about them. It's clear that they're about to go down. But he's like, don't worry, you're all going to live. You're going to be fine. How does he know? He says, for just last night, an angel of the God whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me, and he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And look, God has granted you the lives of all who sail with you. Right? God had a plan for Paul to stand up in front of Rome's emperor and face biggest enemies. God also had a plan for Jonah to stand up in Assyria's capital, proclaiming the message of redemption. God had a plan and lives, a plan to save lives. He saved 276 people on board that ship with Paul. This God values life. He never celebrates death. And so everyone on the ship will live, right? It's a shelter, like we sang, a shelter in the time of storm. So Paul says, take courage, men, for I believe God that it will happen just as he told me. However, we must run aground on some island. This boat isn't going to be saved. We need to get to an island. We're going to crash on that island, and we will be saved. This is where we're going to go next time. But he will crash on an island, just to give you a little heads up, a little island called Malta. did stop at Malta. We actually visited a 6,000-year-old kind of ancient tomb in Malta. It's quite something. And that is where Paul and crew will land. So we will stop there next week, but not next week, the next time I'm here. But there are takeaways, though, to consider from this story, right? Sometimes you have to fall down to rise up. Also, as Paul experienced, sometimes people just don't listen, right? And that is okay. You can share your love for Jesus, but you can't make others love Jesus. You can beg a loved one not to go on a perilous path, but you can't force them. And they may have to experience a fall themselves in order to rise up on their own. That's a really hard one for those of us who are parents, right? Also, sometimes your life plan just doesn't go to plan, right? Paul had a plan. He wanted to stay in Crete. Sometimes life plans just don't go the way you want them to. And that is okay. Don't let that be a stumbling block for you. Because sometimes you gotta learn to pivot in life. And that's exactly what we see Paul doing in this instance. Also, always, and finally, God is always in control. And that is the greatest takeaway here. What needs to happen will happen. So don't sweat it when life's plans take a right turn in a direction that you did not expect to go. Right? God is in control even when you feel completely out of control. Paul was a big-time planner. He always planned and had a purpose to his plans. And did things always go to plan for him? No. Did he whine about it? Yeah, maybe. But for the most part, he just kept calm and carried on. Many times in the story, Paul gets knocked down and then rises up. Right? In Acts 9, Paul meets Jesus on the road to Damascus. Jesus calls on him to rise up and go to the city. In Acts 14, Paul is attacked in Lystra. They stone him, and to the point where they're pretty sure he's dead. And then they take his body and they throw it out of the city. And then his friends gather around him, probably to mourn his death. And he actually rises up and goes into the city. It's a lesson for us. We get knocked down all the time. When we really know that we're in that part, God is with us. We just need to rise up and continue on. We must keep going. You are here for a purpose, right? God has a plan for you, and God is on your side. And don't let life's bumps and daggers drag you down. Because Paul, he was attacked. He was stoned. He was left for dead. He was shipwrecked. He was bound in chains. And every moment he was alive, he just rose back up from all the setbacks, continues on for the kingdom. Right? He always pushes forward until he could push forward no more. And at that point, the world executed him. And then he rose up to his final place in the arms of God. Right? This is the model we should live as followers of the way. Right? Always marching forward, using our gifts to further the kingdom of God. We need to reflect God's love and kindness and compassion to a world that aches even when we feel pretty achy. You need to live your life as perilous as it becomes, knowing that you are not alone. Right? Thousands of years before this, there's a man named Joshua who faithfully followed Moses out of Egypt and into the wilderness. When Moses died, Joshua was left with the daunting task of leading the people into the promised land where enemies awaited them from all sides. And God said to Joshua this. He said, "Have I not commanded you to be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for Yahweh your God is with you wherever you go." It was true for Joshua. It was true for Paul. And this, my friends, it's true for us as well. Let us pray. Lord, life is full of ups and downs. And we sometimes feel like we're caught away in the waves of life, and that we've kind of lost control and we don't have control over what's happening to us. But you are always in control. And you have a great plan for each and every one of us. And that if we feel like we're completely alone and there's no one we can call to, we can call on you. And that is an incredible gift. For anyone who's been down in dumps and has risen from it, we know that your faith and your love and your compassion on us is so incredible that you always have a hand out to grab us from the perilous waves and lift us up out of the sea, just like Peter from the sea, who was falling, and Jesus reached out his hand and grabbed him. And we are the same. We often, many of us, feel so like we're drowning and we're falling down, but you are there to lift us up. And so we praise you and we thank you for that great gift, your love, your compassion, and your presence that is always with us. Amen.